for eFinancePLUS. As you may have noticed, that we are going to be recording this session today, and a copy will be emailed to everyone when it's available on our website. So during the presentation also, you may have noticed that everyone's line is going to be muted. I'm going to try and stop periodically and unmute the lines and ask for questions. Hopefully that'll work. I know in times past people have put us on hold, and so all we hear is hold music when I unmute the lines. So please don't do that, and if you would mute your phones if you don't plan to ask questions, that would be fantastic as well. And I'll try to get through as many of those as I can as we go through the session. If it's not a question I can answer, or if it's something that is better addressed at a different point in the presentation, I'll let you know that as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And we're going to talk first about what is painful AP processing. And sometimes it's better or easier to understand a process by looking at what it isn't. And so instead of painless AP processing, what does painful AP processing look like? In a word, the most common attribute associated with painful AP processing is paper. So it can be printed, you can have it sorted, you can have it stored, it can be manually routed, but at any point in time in the process, you have a lot of paper, it's going to require effort. It also has a high chance or risk of loss. It can be misplaced, it can be misfiled. So if there's a lot of paper in the AP process, you're also going to see things like file folders and filing cabinets and errors due to human interaction, and even calculator tapes at the end of the process. So anything having to do with a lot of paper in an AP process can end up causing it to be painful. And if that's the case, then what do we talk about when we're looking at painless AP processing? And if paper is painful, then we want to get away from the paper as much as possible. And with painless AP processing, we want to minimize the use and the interaction with paper. We also, and this may be surprising if we're talking about digital documents, but we also want to get away from workflow if at all possible. Any of you who have been involved in a workflow implementation can understand that it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to get that up and running, and they can be costly to maintain once they are up and running. So we want to digitize the paper as soon as it's received. We want to make sure that we're only keying in information on that paper once, and we don't want to disrupt the current business process. So your current AP processes that are being performed every day in your organization, we want to make sure that we're as non-invasive as possible if we're going to change those up. And we also want to automate as much as possible. So making sure that decisions that can be made are made by your people, decisions that can be automated are automated. Now, the painless AP processing that we're going to be discussing today really consists of two different pieces of technology. One is Content 360, which I'll introduce in a minute, and the other is obviously eFinancePLUS. So what is Content 360? Content 360 is an enterprise-wide content or document management solution built on top of SharePoint that is seamlessly integrated with all of SunGard's applications. So you may have, obviously you have eFinancePLUS, or you wouldn't likely be on this webinar, but you may also have eSchoolPlus, you may have IEPPLUS. All of those work with Content 360. But at its most basic level, Content 360 gives your users the ability to retrieve documents directly from SunGard applications. It allows us to easily and quickly capture SunGard output, so anything that's being printed out of your SunGard applications, and then it allows us to route those documents through workflow. And I realize I just mentioned that workflow was not a part of this solution, so we're not going to go into that, but if required, we do have workflow capability as well. And again, since this is a SunGard audience, we're going to talk about and show Content 360 as it's integrated with SunGard, specifically eFinancePLUS, but the integrations that we're going to show are not limited to SunGard. And I also realize that we have a lot of people on the call who may not be familiar with Harvest Technology Group. So just by way of introduction, we've been working with SunGard clients since 2001 to help solve all kind of document management challenges. And this places us in a unique position, as that we've literally seen and sat down and talked to dozens of K-12 school districts about their finance processes. So we didn't go out and build these solutions based upon what we think needs to happen. These were built literally piecemeal by talking to SunGard clients. We're still proud to be the only preferred solution provider for SunGard clients in the document management space, and we are work with their clients and with SunGard on a daily basis. So let's take a look at the invoice approval process, and then we'll start getting into exactly how we're going to assist here. But again, at a very high level, I just want to set a baseline of what is involved in the invoice approval process. So this is really made up of 5 different areas. We're going to start with generating purchase orders. We're going to receive invoices. We're going to receive the products we ordered, well, hopefully. We're going to key information from invoices into eFinancePLUS. And finally, we're going to generate a check to pay our vendors. So this is really, again, high-level overview stuff. But it is going to be in how we do these processes that can make them either painful or painless. So, and keep in mind as we go through this, the processes I'm going to be discussing are a distillation, if you will, or they're the general processes that we work with for a lot of school districts. It may not mirror exactly what your process is. So if you have a different part of your process, or if you are doing something or not doing something that I'm addressing, we can certainly take that into consideration, and would love to hear from you outside of the webinar to discuss if we can help. Again, I'm going to be walking through each step of these using a kind of painful example, which again means paper filled, and then I'll show you what the painless version looks like via the demonstration with Content 360. So hopefully you guys will find this entertaining. I'm really excited to show this stuff to you. And let's start with what the very beginning, the PO generation process. So what does the painful PO generation look like? And what we see in most cases, now again, we're not going into procurement as well. Procurement is usually handled inside of eFinancePLUS, but we start where the purchase order is created. And this is typically going to be created with eFinancePLUS examples inside of SunGard. Those data files are going to be sent to Optio, and then those documents are going to be printed. And once they're printed, these purchase orders start to populate either stacks of paper on your desk or individual file folders related to that transaction. So the purchase order is, in many cases, the first document outside of the requisition that creates the payment packet, which ultimately accompanies the check when the documents or when the checks are signed. So what we're finding, though, is that even though eFinancePLUS has the ability to attach these documents automatically to a record inside of eFinancePLUS, most school districts are still printing them. And the reason they're printing them is because of this concept of the payment packet. They're not scanning the vendor invoices, they're not scanning the packing slip, because the batch scanning process and then going back and attaching it inside of eFinancePLUS is fairly cumbersome. So the purchase order becomes the first printed document to make up this stack. Taking a look at the painless process, we're still going to send that same SunGard output, the same purchase orders data, to Optio. Optio is going to format that and then deliver it to a monitored directory. Now this is not a paper folder, this is a directory on the network. Where once those documents are delivered to that network directory, they're automatically ingested into Content 360, where they are indexed. So when I mean indexed, what I mean is it's the metadata around the document. So on the purchase order, it's the purchase order number, the total, the date, maybe the vendor name, the vendor address, and things of that nature. So all of that is going to happen with no manual interaction. As soon as the button is clicked on print, those documents are stored inside of Content 360, and they're associated with the transaction. So what this looks like on the back end is that I'm inside of eFinancePLUS. I have pulled up a purchase order inquiry, and if I want to see the documents related to this purchase order, instead of using the attachment button, I just go and click the integration button at the upper right corner, and I see the list of the documents that are located inside of Content 360 related to that transaction or that purchase order. So here I've got the purchase order, the vendor invoice, and the packing slip. If I wanted to, for example, go in and view the invoice that's associated with that purchase order, I just click the View button, and that pulls up the document inside of Content 360. Now this is a multi-page invoice, or it looks like an invoice with a bunch of T's and C's on the back of it. I can quickly go through that document, review the pages, email or print if I have the appropriate security privileges, or even annotate it. So I can add sticky notes, highlight information, redact information, so on and so forth. All of this is within inside of Content 360 related to the data located on the eFinancePLUS screen. And keep in mind, for the purchase order, no manual interaction. We just had to click the print button and it was automatically captured and stored inside Content 360 and related to this screen. Okay, so that is the painless PO creation process. Let's talk a little bit about the invoice, the painful invoice receipt. So invoices are generally received inside of K-12 school districts in one of three different ways. Most commonly, it's received via a paper, so it comes in through the mail. It's a paper document at the in the business office or at headquarters. More and more frequently, we're seeing emails being sent into the or invoices sent via email into the school district. And you may have the outlier or the occasional document that's sent to a local campus. So if it's an email, generally these documents are printed. If it's sent to a local campus, it's generally sent via interoffice mail. But again, this paper invoice becomes the second document inside of the payment packet. From a painless invoice perspective, we're seeing again the same paper, the same emails, but they're going to be digitized, either be via scanning in through a multifunction device or through a scanner, or the email is already digital and we want to maintain it in that digital format. So we don't want to print emails. They're dropped into the same monitor directory, either automatically or from a user interaction process, and then they're indexed. So unlike the purchase order process where we're automatically indexing these documents, anything received via paper or via email is going to go through a manual indexing or an advanced capture process. And I want to show you what that looks like very quickly. So advanced capture means that I'm actually going to go into the document and I'm going to grab data from that document to be able to use for my indexing process. So in this example, we're showing the fields on the left that we're looking for information, and then the data output on the right side here. These data values will then be sent into Content 360 to index the document, or even into SunGard on the very back end. So what happens then is, from an OCR perspective, we want to make sure that we're capturing the most accurate information possible. So we're going to compare these data elements with the data located inside of eFinancePLUS to look for discrepancies. If we don't see any, then this data can automatically flow into eFinancePLUS. If there is discrepancy, then we'll highlight that information so a user can take action to try and to resolve it. So what that looks like in the Content 360 side, as we go into our scanning interface, is I can see that we have a bunch of documents that have already been scanned into Content 360. And in this example, these documents are labeled as a batch, so I have 7 pages of something. I'm not sure if it's 7 one-page invoices or 1 7-page invoices. So I'll click Open the Batch, and here I'll see the first page of the document that's already been scanned into the software. And again, this could have been scanned using a direct attach scanner. It could have been dropped into the software via email. But what I find is the index values on this document are already filled out. They're already completed. And that is because this document already went through the OCR process. So we've taken the data off of this document, ingested it into Content 360, and these are our index values. I don't see any fields that are highlighted in red, which would indicate that there is some sort of an error, either a database mismatch or maybe a character that we couldn't recognize. So is it a lowercase L, an uppercase I, or an exclamation point? This one looks good, so we can just index it and send it on into Content 360, and then we'll look at the next document in the batch. Oops, let me do that. All right, so the next document in the batch is an invoice that we've received from Dell Corporation. The values here are not populated, which means it didn't go through the OCR process. So I need to index this document. Now I could come in and just start to type these values, but I'm a horrible typist, and this is obviously prone for error. What I would prefer to do is to use the data located inside of eFinancePLUS to help me with this information extraction. So I'm going to type in the purchase order number and click auto populate, and that's going to go into Content 360. Oops, I'm back to the Apple invoice again. Try that one more time. And it's going to grab the data elements from eFinancePLUS and use those to populate my index values inside of Content 360. And there's actually a lot going on here behind the scenes where we're using the data located inside of eFinancePLUS to make some decisions. So the first decision we're making is on the total. So this may or may not access, or may or may not equal the information that's on the invoice. And the reason being is that this invoice could have had pieces or parts of it that have already been received. And in this case, I may not want to key in the entire bit of information, but I'm only going to, or I may not key in the total, but I'm only going to key in the total of the information that's already been received, or the parts that have already been received inside of Content 360. Also, you can look down at some of the values here that received is by default set to no, keyed. So is this invoice been keyed into eFinancePLUS? Automatically set to no, but or received. There's nothing in the received status yet. But if we had determined inside of eFinancePLUS that some information or some of the products have been received, then these fields here would have been updated. They would have been changed based upon the status of the products that have been received inside of eFinancePLUS. Additionally, if this was not a PO-based invoice, we could have just entered in the supplier invoice number up here or the vendor number and retrieved information about this document using one of those fields as well. So in many cases, we're dealing with blanket or open purchase orders, and sometimes that information is already inside of eFinancePLUS. We'll use that to populate the information on the invoice. So with that being said, I'm going to try and unmute the phones. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and speak up, and then we'll jump back into it. Okay, so the phone lines are unmuted. Any questions about what we've covered so far in the process? All right, fantastic. We'll go back on mute, and then we'll continue the process. We'll go into the receiving and talk about how we're keying information in. Okay, the receiving process is going to happen pretty much as it is inside of eFinancePLUS currently. So this is mostly handled in eFinancePLUS. That's not going to change. However, I mentioned earlier that Content 360 is going to go out and periodically poll data inside of eFinancePLUS to update certain fields. It's going to update the received status and the received information to determine if any interaction or if any products have been received off of the invoices we've already scanned. We're going to be able to handle both items that were received in the warehouse and not, and this is going to happen with no manual interaction. So nothing that we need to do from a manual perspective here. So at some point in time, either a date is going to trigger on the calendar, it's going to be the end of the month, it's going to be Friday, and we're going to need to start going into keying these invoices for payment. And again, this is where that stack of documents or file folders, if your school district is large enough, these are broken down into individual file folders. This all now becomes part of the keying process. And so what we see school districts doing is literally thumbing through these documents, thumbing through these invoices, and then going into eFinancePLUS to see what the receive status is. So have we received anything on this invoice? Have we received it all? And if so, I'm going to pull that invoice aside, and then I'm going to start keying the information into eFinancePLUS. And it's at this point that we really see where Content 360 can assist in this process. So let's jump out and show you what this looks like from a Content 360 perspective. Remember, we were talking about the data elements that we're capturing on those invoices. So has the invoice been keyed into eFinancePLUS? Have information been received on it? So I'm going to go in and select that the information has not been keyed, but it has been received. And when I click search, this is going to show me a list of all the invoices that are outstanding that match this criteria. So we'll jump into the first one. Here's our Dell invoice again. We're going to go ahead and click the edit button. And we have the invoice, we have information. Now we can see that this invoice has been received, which means Content 360 recognized that data elements had been received on this. And I'm going to apologize in advance. Usually the people doing this process will have dual monitors, but in order to best demonstrate that, let me just pull this up. And then they would go into eFinancePLUS, and if you had the paper in front of you, you would start to key this information into eFinancePLUS. But inside Content 360, this information has already been completed to a large extent. So I don't want to have to go back in and retype this into eFinancePLUS. So instead, what I'm going to do is just type in my control number, which is generally some initials, and then I'm going to use our integration button to do a couple of things. We're going to grab the data that's already been keyed into Content 360, populate it into and populate it into eFinancePLUS. So you'll see that the data that's located in the Content 360 screen has now been populated into eFinancePLUS, and the keyed field has been selected to yes now, and the control number that I typed into eFinancePLUS has bidirectional, with our bidirectional integration, been entered into Content 360. So now this information is inside of Content 360. Now, what most school districts tell us is that they don't want to automatically type in the total amount. That information needs to be keyed because it's part of the quality control check. So we would go over and then key that information into the software. Okay. And where is this valuable? So again, we're talking about quality control. We're talking about our process checks. I now have a control number associated with this transaction, so I can go back into Content 360. I'm sorry, back into Content 360. Clear out this search. Type in my control number. Search for all the documents that are related to that control number. So these are all the invoices that are being paid via that check, and I can compare the value on the control number with the check register report to make sure that these two are equal. So instead of having an adding tape or something along those lines where I'm literally typing this information out, hitting print and making sure they're equal, Content 360 is doing this totaling for us based upon the data elements that have been keyed into Content 360 and then subsequently into eFinancePLUS. So now I finally have the ability to scan my invoices as soon as they arrive at the door, and I can work only on the invoices that have already been received. I can key those in for payment. And I finally have, at the very end of the process, the ability to reconcile what's been keyed into the documents that have been stored in Content 360, keyed into SunGard with the check register. And again, all of this is happening without any paper being added to the overall process. So one more time, I'll stop and ask for any questions. And then if there's no questions, we'll show the last part of the process and then wrap up. Okay, any questions about what we're showing this afternoon? All right, fantastic. I must be doing a great job of entertaining this, or everyone has had lunch and they're now going into sleep mode. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the phones back on mute again, and we'll wrap up here. Okay, and as the final part of the process is obviously the check processing. So the checks, all the totals add up. We're ready to process the checks. Again, this is going to be very similar to the purchase order process in the fact that those files are created. These are the check files. They are sent to Optio. Optio then takes a non-negotiable copy, drops it into the monitor directory where it's automatically indexed and sent into Content 360. Now, obviously, you're going to have a physical check document in most cases. That will be printed and delivered along with any supporting documents for signature. However, instead of having that check bundle, which is the invoice, the purchase order, the packing slip, and other supporting information accompanying those checks, the signer, if they want to go back and verify anything, will just log into Content 360 using that control number, and then they can go and access any of the documents that are related to that check process. So again, an entirely paper process. We're only keying in information once it's keyed into Content 360. Then we're using our integration to populate those fields inside of eFinancePLUS. No more having clerks have to go through and scroll to find out what has been keyed or what's been received. That information is readily available. And finally, the ultimate, the check is printed, entered into Content 360, fully indexed, and ready to be retrieved along with the other values or the other documents in that system. So we're running up on our 30-minute allotted time. I'll unmute the lines one more time to see if we have any additional questions about this process. If you do have additional questions, please go ahead and you can ask them now and I'll answer them, or drop me an email. You can see my contact information on the screen right now. And thank you all very much for attending this afternoon. So phone lines are being unmuted if there are any additional questions. All right, folks, you have my contact information. Please reach out if you have any questions. And I thank you very, very much for spending the time with us this afternoon. This will be recorded and the link will be sent to everybody. So if someone who you know could not attend, you can forward the link to them and they'll be able to access it. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.